1969 North Omaha, as Buddy called it, the Near North Side, which was a journalistic jingoism to refer to the area intensely populated by members of the African American community, was under intense police scrutiny. The effects of the social unrest of the Vietnam War, the plight of police conduct in the African American community culminated, I think, with the period of 1968, 1969, when there was an awful lot of protest against the status quo, and many other social undercurrents occurred. What Buddy alluded to earlier, what we didn't know was that there was a police intelligence effort underway to monitor black advocacy exercising their rights under the First Amendment to protest and police brutality and police excesses, and that kind of gives you a kind of a background. It's been a long time since the events of North Omaha burned up in about 1968. If I'm not correct, Buddy, I think that's when North 24th Street suffered some burning and some riots that again called forth police activities which were of brutal proportions. But in any event, in 1970, there was a federal search warrant issued to seize some rock quarry dynamite that had been brought into the Omaha community. It's my understanding that the rock quarry dynamite came from a burglary in Des Moines and was brought to Omaha by members of a motorcycle gang. The members of the motorcycle gang then transferred the sticks of dynamite to the NCCF, which was called National Committee to Combat Fascism, which David Rice and Edward Poindexter and others, the Peaks and many others, were affiliated with. It was sort of a mean joke, as it were, by these motorcycle people, hoping that these blacks would kill each other with this very unstable rock quarry dynamite. The rock quarry dynamite, purportedly, according to the police version, was brought to David Rice's house, and at David Rice's house, supposedly, according to the contingents of government, a suitcase, Samsonite suitcase, was filled with this rock quarry dynamite, brought to the house that Buddy referred to. Police were called to the house. A clothespin apparatus was purportedly used to wire the suitcase to a floor. When the police officer picked it up, Larry Menard, I believe was the name of the police officer, the device exploded, virtually collapsing the house. David Rice was then sought as a culprit, but it's really amazing that the arrest warrants were issued. They were issued on the basis that a police officer had been killed at this NCCF, National Community to Combat Fascism, advocated violence toward police officers, all based upon the rhetoric that David Rice and others were espousing. And it was only because of their association affiliation with the NCCF that these arrest warrants were issued. They were subsequently dismissed until Dwayne Christopher Peak, a 15-year-old, was ultimately interviewed by police officers, and he told a bizarre set of stories. I remember during the trial, I think I must have charted 7 different stories about where the so-called suitcase with the so-called contents of dynamite came from and who built it and so forth and so on. The story, I think, really has some amazing aspects to it because a search warrant was obtained by a lawyer that Buddy knows, J. William Gallup, who was then an assistant U.S. attorney at the time. Apparently an informer of the type and stripe that Buddy was referring to had told the the FBI that there was a house in North 24th Street that had this rock quarry dynamite on it. And what ensued was a debate between who was going to execute the search warrant, whether it was going to be the FBI, whether it was going to be the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, Tax, and Firearms Division of the Internal Revenue Service, or some other law enforcement agency. And because there was such inter-agency rivalry and competition to be able to execute the warrants, it's my understanding that the warrant was canceled. The theory that I have espoused for all these years since 1970 is that had these police officers not vied for the glory of executing the search warrant, I think that the dynamite would have been found, not at David Rice's house, but at a house in North 24th Street. And Officer Menard didn't have to die, nor did the other sundry police officers have to suffer the severe injuries that they sustained. Anyhow.
Dave Herzog was the defense attorney for David Rice in 1971,
yep.
and had the case successfully overturned in federal district court in 1974. We're talking today on Beneath the Surface about the case of David Rice and Ed Poindexter. David Rice now goes by the name Mondo. This is Beneath the Surface. I'm your host, Kathy Still. We're going to continue with their story in just a moment, right after this quick 60-second break. Stay tuned.
Wednesday on Up for Air.
A Guatemalan bishop has been murdered one day after releasing a report on human rights abuses by the military.
The GOP is hoping to raise interest rates on student loans in order to keep commercial banks in the market.
And we'll showcase the spoken word of some very young writers.
I'm Marcos Fromer.
And I'm Kathy Gorey.
I hope you'll join us Wednesday morning starting at 7 a.m. on Up for Air.
KPFK, Los Angeles 90.7 FM, listener-sponsored Pacifica Radio for all of Southern California. Stay tuned for more Beneath the Surface.
Can we get another 3
This
hours?
is Beneath the Surface on KPFK 90.7 FM. It is a complicated story, but we're going to cover it here today. We've got several people with us today. Buddy Hogan is in studio with us. He was the president for 10 years of Omaha's branch of the NAACP. He's now a resident of California. Kitrin Zeigel's here. She's been doing research on the case since 1995. We're joined on the phone by Dave Herzog, who was the defense attorney for David Rice back in the 70s. And we've got a couple other people on the line. Also, Ed Poindexter, I spoke with him on Sunday, and hopefully he will be able to call in from prison today to be with us on the air. We're going to go to Rayanne Schmitz right now. She's an attorney who was active with the defense committee, and she was with David Rice at her house the night of the bombing. And so we're going to go ahead and hear from Rayanne. Hi, Rayanne. Are you with us?
Hi, and thank you. I was not an attorney at the time. I was a student activist, along with a number of other student activists who were...
And you were with David Rice?
Pardon me?
And you were with David Rice that night?
Well, yes. He was a personal friend of mine. He was the boyfriend of one of my roommates, and he had spent the night at our house that night. We had been up till very late, 2 o'clock probably in the morning, eating popcorn and giggling. Mondo is a lot of fun. He's a very fun person. He's intelligent and bright and fun to be around. And that's how I mostly remember him. And after that, I went to bed, and sometime during the night, the bombing occurred.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that Mondo had anything to do with it. I don't think he knew that it happened. I don't believe that there was any part of his person that could be a part of that kind of violence. He was very interested in protecting the African American community from violence. I remember during the burnings that David Herzog referred to, that David was standing atop the roof of the Mothers for Adequate Welfare building because he was very concerned that it might catch fire, and so he was up there with a hose and was trying to protect that building so that nothing would happen to it, and because he was so supportive of of the cause for women and children at that time.
Mm-hmm. And knowing the kind of person that Mondo was, that David Rice was, does it seem likely to you that, knowing that he was under scrutiny, that he would have this dynamite in the basement of his home?
No, I don't believe that. I don't know. I don't believe that for a minute. I just don't. Kitrin Zeichel, in a conversation with her just the other day, told me the description that an African American police officer at the time, and there were very few of them in 1968, and this particular man is the man that Mondo turned himself into when he found out that a warrant was out for his arrest, and this man's name was Pittman Foxall. And Officer Foxall said that he had known David Rice since he was 3 feet tall, and that he was not capable of tearing the wing from a butterfly. And I think that's just a perfect characterization of David. He's a peaceful person and not the kind of person that would have plans to do any such kind of violent thing. It just was not in his nature to do that.
All right, Rayanne, I want to thank you for being with us. And Kitrin, let me ask you to talk about some of the details. It's easy for a person to say they're innocent, but there's a lot of extenuating circumstances in this case. Dave Herzog mentioned the case of Dwayne Peak. He confessed, said that he had actually planted the bomb, and then he later recounted, and there's a very curious event that took place while the trial was going on. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I actually have a different perspective on the case than a lot of people do, because I'm not convinced that Dwayne Peak actually placed that bomb.
Mm-hmm.
The only African American...
First of all, tell us...
And he was the main witness against Mondo and Ed. He was seen on the near north side with a suitcase the night of the bombing.
Mm-hmm.
He had a legitimate reason to have a suitcase. He was leaving the state in a matter of days to join the Job Corps. He did not have a place to stay. His father had thrown him out of the house. He stayed with his sister or his friends, and he was going around collecting his clothes so he could leave the state. And his sister dropped him off in the old neighborhood. He grew up at a house at 2809 Ohio. So on that Sunday night, his sister drops him off near the old house. The house that blew up was 2867 Ohio. It was like a couple of houses up the street.
Mm-hmm.
His sister testified at the trial that she drove into the alley and they watched him walk towards the house. And when I met her for the first time, she interrupted me when I said, "You drove in the alley," and she said, "I never drove in the alley." So it's possible that she drove him to the old neighborhood where he knew absolutely everybody. She dropped him off, and since he was the last person seen in the neighborhood with a suitcase, he becomes the prime suspect in this policeman's murder because it was a suitcase bomb.
And confesses to a bombing he didn't commit?
Okay, now this is where the search warrant that Dave Herzog mentioned is very, very important. I have a copy of the search warrant right here. It took me years to get my hands on this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in the search warrant it says that a 12-year-old girl named Mary Alice Clark witnessed 5 men making a bomb on July 15th. The 5 men were Frank and Will Peak, who were first cousins of Dwayne Peak, 2 other brothers, and I don't know the 2 men, so I don't want to say their names on the radio, and a 5th man. And according to this search warrant, she watched these 5 men make a bomb. She saw machine guns in the Panther headquarters. She saw boxes of dynamite. And this warrant was never served, not because of fighting between the police and the FBI as to who got to serve it, but according to the World Herald, the ATF, it's not an FBI warrant, it's an ATF warrant. The ATF contacted the Justice Department in Washington, and they told them that the information was not credible, that the informant herself was not credible. And so I think that if you showed Dwayne Peak this warrant and said to him, if you don't implicate David Rice and Edward Poindexter and say that they made this bomb and told you to place it, we will put you on trial. And right in his confession, one of his depositions, he says to this police officer, nobody's going to believe that I didn't do this because I was the last person seen in that neighborhood with that suitcase.
Mm-hmm.
Furthermore, if they showed him this warrant, and if you read this warrant, I don't want to read it on the air because it's 5 pages long, you would be convinced that these 5 men made this bomb. So Conceivably, they could have shown in this warrant and said, if you don't convict these two guys, Rice and Poindexter, then we're going to go after your first cousins, Frank and Will Peak, and we have this warrant that proves that they made a bomb, and nobody's going to believe that they did not.
So he came forward, confessed to the bombing. Before we talk any more about Dwayne Peak, though, let's talk about the 15-year-old witness. Her family didn't know anything about
12 years old.
Or 12 years old.
Okay, imagine this. An ATF agent somehow meets a 12-year-old girl. I don't know how she would come in contact with an ATF agent. He never tells her mother that he put her name on a federal search warrant. According to her sister Vicky, a month after her name was put on this warrant, she disappeared into thin air, she was never seen again, and her parents declared her dead. You would think that if she saw 5 men make a bomb, she might be in a little